The AFCA's 35 Under 35 Coaches Leadership Institute is the premier education and networking opportunity for the country's top young coaches. Full-time assistant or head coaches who will be 35 years old or younger on January 1st are encouraged to apply between July 1st and 31st of this year. For information on how to apply for the AFCA 35 Under 35 Coaches Leadership Institute, the required materials for the application, and more, please visit afca.com/35 under 35. Welcome to this week's episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm. This week, we sit down with USF head coach Alex Golesh. In this conversation, Coach Golesh discusses his approach to recruiting, how he learned and developed as a young coach, and how he went about building his staff as a first-time head coach. But first, a word from CoachComm.
Deuce left, check with me. If they're in quarters match, we're going to Pittsburgh or Ohio.
They're in zero.
Let's go Hippo, Seattle, wide choice. If we call the protection right, it's 6.
When a play call is the difference between winning and losing, your headset choice could be your most important decision. When the call counts, CoachComm is the only choice for clear, dependable communication. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
We got it, guys. Good job.
Now, let's get inside the headset with Coach Golesh.
Coach, what's happening, man? What's going on? How are you?
Man, I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, well, man, it's always good to connect with you. A little busier these days than when I met you a few years ago, but that's always a good thing, right?
No question. It's good to be busy in our profession.
That's right, man. That's right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into this thing, Coach. When did you know you want to be a part of this great profession?
Yeah, you know what? I knew early. I knew in high school. I had an incredible high school coach that changed my life in every imaginable way. Really kind of showed me that the positive side of this profession, which is the ability to help young people change their path. And I was one of those young guys that needed some help, and I got it. And I think literally before I finished high school, I knew, man, this is what I want to do in some capacity. You know, I think at that point I was maybe thinking I was going to be in business or real estate or something, but always coach. And then as I got into it and said, man, like, this is what I want to do full time.
Yeah.
And so I knew early, and I had a why early, and I had a reason early for wanting to do it. And through all the craziness of our profession, I've always tried to stay true to making it about the young guys in our program, and got me to this point, so we're going to stick with it.
That's right. Well, as you know, the hardest part of this profession is just you probably have a different perspective now in the head seat, but one of the hardest parts, especially early on in your career, is just getting that first gig, just getting that first opportunity to get started. And you were able to do that as a student assistant at Ohio State. How did you get on the radar? How did you take advantage of it? And what was that process like to get that first gig?
Yeah, so I was coaching high school football, and for my high school coach, and I knew a couple of guys on the staff, like Mark D'Antonio had come through, recruited one of my teammates in high school. Got a chance to get to know Coach Haycock, Jim Haycock, who I worked with there, and literally reached out and said, man, like, I wanna do this, and just need an opportunity. And Bob Tucker, who was the director of football ops at the time, reached out again because I knew a couple of the guys just from high school and the recruiting process, and to swing through and made a decent enough impression. And then shoot, man, that was 2.5 years of learning nonstop, and knowing, you know, by the time I graduated, man, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to do full time. And the best thing about that 2.5 year stretch is just the guys that were there, the young coaches, more so than anybody else, but the young coaches, the GAs, the quality control guys, those are still some of my closest friends to this day, and helped me throughout.
So you actually were you were previously coaching high school football. I missed it on my notes. I did a bad job there. So you were already a high school coach. Where were you located at?
I was at Westerville Central High School, just right there in just outside of Columbus, Ohio.
And how did you get that job? I guess I would take that question back and put it there. How did you get started at that high school?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to coach, and my high school coach became the head coach at Westerville Central,
Okay.
and he was actually my high school offensive coordinator. Became also my biology teacher, which is another story. But became the high school the head coach there, and hired me, and I did that for a year, and that's when I knew, man, I wanted the bug. Like I had the bug of
Yeah.
this is what I want to do. And while I was working on my degree, that's when I got an opportunity at Ohio State.
What was kind of one of those learning curves of getting introduced into the profession? Obviously, it's much different than when you're a player. You kind of get to see the behind the scenes stuff, and how Ohio football, as in every kind of state, is a little bit different. Whereas in Texas, man, it lines pretty similar to like a college kind of deal. Whereas in Ohio, I mean, you got to teach, head coaches teach, and all that kind of stuff. What were some of the things behind the scenes that may have caught you off guard or caught you by surprise?
Yeah, I think more than anything, the during the day you are teaching, and so the football part really starts in a lot of ways at whatever 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Yeah,
I've had the opportunity to recruit in all over the state of Texas, and that's with athletic periods and head coaches generally being ADs or assistant ADs. Not a whole lot of teaching demanded in that regard. There's teaching all day. You got players all the way through, but not a true typical classroom setting in Ohio. For the most part, not that way. I think the end result ends up being the same, but I knew I didn't want to spend a bunch of time in a classroom for 8 hours before I got to go do football. That was the one thing I learned. I've got a degree in special ed. I enjoyed the classroom part of it, but man, I think anytime you're sitting there waiting until 3 o'clock, rather than enjoying the 7 to 3, I think I knew at that point I wanted to do football all day long.
And so you get the opportunity to work there at Ohio State as a student assistant. Now, my notes here says you actually work with the defensive staff, and not only that, it was kind of a special time frame at that point, Big Ten champs and 2005 Fiesta Bowl champs. So you didn't just join a staff. I mean, you just joined just a tremendous opportunity altogether in terms of being successful on the field, and then obviously working on the side of the ball that, I mean, for the rest of your career, you end up as an offensive guy. So what was that like, just working a little bit more on the defense and then being part of some championship pedigree?
Yeah, I think that all started with the people. I worked with Jim Haycock and Luke Fickle, and initially Mel Tucker, and then Paul Haynes came in, and we had a really, really cool staff. Tim Beckman ended up getting hired there towards the tail end, kind of helped me as my career went. And even that offensive staff was awesome with Daryl Hazel and Doc Tressel, like Jim Bowman. There were some really, really special people in there, and obviously headed up by Coach Tress. And that's the one thing, if I got anything out of that experience more than anything, was the way Coach Tressel treated everybody in that building. In terms of the young coaches and the respect he showed for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think it's carried with me 20 years later, man, like every person in the building matters. Whether they're a student coach or the coordinators, everybody matters, and everybody's got value. And some of the best ideas come from the young guys. And so I took a lot out of that. The working on the defensive side of the ball, I played defense. That's where my comfort zone was anyways. It was really good. I worked with Jim Haycock with the D-line, and honestly learned a lot about managing players, recruiting, big picture view. He became the coordinator the next year, which I thought was awesome because it increased my role in a lot of ways. He was up in the box on game day. I was down on the field with those guys, and he put a lot of trust in me. Gave me the confidence, honestly, in a lot of ways that I needed to go through the profession. Like, man, if this dude trusts me with these guys on game day, trust me with these guys throughout the day, watching film and prep and all of it, and not including all the GA type work in terms of the breakdowns and scouting reports and stuff. And I tried to take as much as I could off of everybody I worked with in terms of, man, the more I could do, the less replaceable I thought I would be. And that was the days before big recruiting departments and on-campus recruiting. And so you were, as a student coach, you were doing breakdown scouting reports. You were doing You were doing a lot of the recruiting stuff. You were setting things up, tearing things down. You were writing a lot of letters for a lot of coaches. And then obviously the coaching part of it, I got to learn from Coach Haycock, who I think is one of the best. Got to learn from Luke Fickell, who I think has obviously done a phenomenal job. And then Coach Tress, who I think is one of the best to ever do it. And just learned everything and anything you can imagine from an operational side, but certainly from a player development side, how you treat the guys, and it gave me a really, really good foundation moving forward. And we got to win. We got to win a ton of games and certainly won a Big Ten championship, and it was really cool to see the growth and development of the program at that time to where it ended up getting to.
Yeah. Well, after that, I'm going to kind of wrap these two stops up into one here. You get the opportunity at GA, both at Northern Illinois and Oklahoma State, and you looks like prepping yourself up to be one hell of a defensive coordinator, because you get some D-line experience early on, and you get some DB experience, some linebacker experience, but you get a little twinge at O-line, which I thought was interesting in there. Hopefully I'm correct with that. What did you find, especially now as you sit in that seat now, what was the advantage of getting a lot of experience in some different positions early on in your career?
Yeah, I think I always saw the game from a defensive side. I got a chance to work with the secondary there at Northern Illinois. And then my second year, got a chance to work with the O-line. And I went and worked for Joe Novak at NIU, who's a Cleveland, Ohio guy who did an incredible job building that NIU program into what you know it as today. He took that thing over. I think the first 3 years they won 2 games, and he built it, like truly built that thing from the ground up, and won some championships and became a consistent bowl team, and which hadn't been done in DeKalb, Illinois in a long, long, long time. And and he put me on defense, and I was the video coordinator, and so that's what I did. And then after a year, they wanted somebody that's done it before, in terms of had been a GA for a little bit, and so put me on offense, and worked with Sam Pittman initially, who's a dear friend, and then Harold Etheridge, who became the O-line coach there. And that was the first time I've ever worked on the offensive side, and I think it was interesting to the coordinator and really everybody in that room. Like, man, this guy's got a very defensive perspective of everything. And so did that for a year, and then went to Oklahoma State and worked with the linebackers. Got a chance to coach the nickels, and that was an awesome experience getting back to the defensive side. And at that time in the Big 12, you did not want to be on the defensive side of the ball.
No.
And I know that era of what the Big 12 was. Man, I felt like every offense, and there was, I want to say 9 quarterbacks that got drafted just from that year alone in 2008. And I mean, there was 10 or 11 offenses in the top 25 in the country. So like, that was the last place you wanted to be, is coaching defense. But I learned a ton, saw a different level of spread offense than I'd ever seen. In a lot of ways saw Baylor at the beginning of the Bryles time, and them building that offense into what it became. And always, like, that was the first time I was like, man, like, that's the future of college football right there.
Yeah.
Is tempo and creating matchups in space. And like I said, that was right at the beginning of it, but was on the defensive side, and then left there and went to Toledo with our defensive coordinator, and initially got hired on the defensive side of the ball. I was going to coach the DBs, and I thought that was where my career path was headed.
Yeah. Well, you pinpointed that kind of that Big 12 offensive era, and I know a lot of your offensive style, okay, especially at UCF time, was a reflection of that late Baylor Art Briles run. Super wide splits, spread them, shred them, a lot more running than people probably imagine, whereas it looked like it was a bunch of passing. The interesting thing was, I was a Baylor grad. My last year was Guy Morris, who was a previous coach before Art Briles last year. So I stuck around in Waco, coached at Waco High School for a couple of years. So I got to see the Briles era thing. The most interesting thing, and it's funny because you mentioned that because you were there in 2008, is if you check the tape out of Baylor offense in 2008 versus 2014-ish, those last couple of years, it's all the same principles, but it looks so different. So I love to, we don't typically talk too much X's and O's stuff on there, but obviously you got a perspective from the front end and the back end of kind of how that thing develops. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit more later on there. But you mentioned, all right, so this kind of changes up that you initially take the job, your first full-time role at Toledo on the defensive side of the ball. In my notes and everywhere on the internet, it says you were the tight ends coach. So what happened to get you from one side of the ball to the other?
Yeah, so Matt Campbell was our offensive coordinator, and we were all young, man. Like, you talk about that staff. Jason Candle was on that staff. Scott Satterfield was on that staff. There was a lot of us that were young that literally we were trying to figure life out at the same time. Like, I had no idea what was going on, but we were going to figure this thing out together.
Right.
Patrick Graham was on that original staff, and Patrick's become a high-end defensive coordinator in the NFL now. Like, there were some really, really good coaches on that staff, and between Matt Campbell, Jason Candle, those were good friends of mine from years back. And Matt convinced me that it was going to make a lot of sense for me to go to offense, and kind of sold it as, man, you've got this defensive background that can really help us on offense. In turn, our head coach was a DB guy, and he's like, dude, you're going to be miserable over there.
Yeah.
And it sold me as, man, come over here, help us out. And really was going to be an opportunity for us as a group of friends to work in the same room together. And I tell you, I learned probably my best lesson. I don't even know if Matt remembers this, but when I moved over, the only job open was the running back job. And we went through the off season. I was going to coach the secondary, and then and ended up right before spring ball, we had the running back job open, and we went to the head coach and said, man, like, let me go over there. You know way more DB guys than you do running back coaches. Let me go coach over there. And I honestly thought it was going to be a year deal, and I was going to go back over and ended up staying, obviously for the rest of my career here. But I remember sitting down with Matt, and this was a really cool lesson and probably a good lesson for young coaches. I said, Matt, like, I don't know anything about running backs. And I remember sitting there with my notebook, notebook and pen, and I'm like, man, like, give me the scoop here, bro. Like, tell me what it is. And he's like, well, you ready? I'm like, yeah. Like, start with, stand, start, eyes, like, let's go, man. I'm ready. He's like, you ready? I'm like, ready. He's like, recruit one. I'm like, okay, recruit one. Like, what else?
That's it.
He's like, that's it. I'm like, there's got to be more to it, right? He's like, I mean, yeah, like a little bit, but like,
yeah,
go get a dude that can play, and we'll figure the rest of it out. And I honestly, and I've joked with Matt over the years on it, but I never forgot that because it's so true. And there's obviously a lot that goes into coaching running backs, and there's some incredible coaches. And I think the deeper I went into it, I was like, man, there's a lot more that goes into it. But at its core, it's really hard to make a bad back a really good back, and it's so true. Go get one, and I think it's so true at every position. But I thought that was funny, and I learned it at a really young age. Like, go get a guy, and you'll be a much better coach.
Absolutely, and it's funny. It kind of segues into my next question, because you ended up being a recruiting coordinator there. Talking about go get one, you ended up being a recruiting coordinator there. One of the big things that stood out when I first kind of got introduced to you and met you and saw your resume and stuff for the 35 on 35 a few years ago was I kept hearing how good of a recruiter you were. So clearly you took that running back thing, kind of start spreading that out everywhere. But, in the MAC, you guys did a heck of a job, getting talent to that school. And one of the things, I have very little experience around the MAC. I don't know much about it, but I got a lot of friends that have coached in the MAC, and they always say it's difficult because it's a bunch of the similar type schools all in a pretty tight area recruiting the same kids. How do you stand out in the MAC? How do you stand out in the recruiting in the recruiting game? And how were you able to establish yourself as a great recruiter early on in your career?
Yeah, I think the recruiting coordinator thing helped me a lot. I think that at that time, and it's really uncommon anymore than there's an on-field recruiting coordinator, but literally it was me and one other guy, and we did all of the planning, at that time you were still creating a DVD library, and everything from graphics to camps. Like, I did all that, and it helped me so much. One, understanding what our off the field departments now should be doing, but two, a uniquely good appreciation for staying organized and being thorough and communicating at an extremely high rate. And so I think being in the weeds of it has helped me drastically now leading the entire thing. But I think the recruiting piece, I knew early on something like I was going to have to do something different. And by different, I mean, I was going to have to stand out in some way, shape, or form. And I think I learned early that if I just did my job at a really, really good rate, and you don't have to do anything to stand out, just do a really, really good job at a high rate. And so every little responsibility I ever got, I took and I went with it, whether it was recruiting coordinator, whether it was special teams or a piece of special teams or coaching the backs or the tight ends like, I learned early, man, I'm going to have to stand out, but the only way you really stand out is if you just do an elite job at your job. Yeah. And I learned that back at Ohio State. And so you talk about the recruiting piece, I think I've always just taken a lot of pride in it. And early on, I figured out, and I think it's still true. And, we were talking off the air a little bit about, college football changing, and transfer portal, and NIL, and everybody talks about how crazy it is, but in reality, you can still outwork people. And there's just different wrinkles that have been thrown into the formula, but you can still outwork people. And that's the approach I took early on. And I'm proud of the reputation that, man, this guy's a really good recruiter. I'm really proud of the fact that now people can say, well, this guy's a really good football coach too. I think that all matters. But beyond any of that, I think the thing I'm most proud of is I would hope people would say, man, that guy never got outworked by anybody. Mm-hmm. And I think that's recruiting. I think coaching. I think it's really true in any aspect of life. You can still outwork people, but in recruiting, it really, really shows, and it shows really quickly, and it shows year after year. I think you can always write one more letter. You can always send one more text. You can always make one more phone call. And I think in this day and age where now that this next generation of coaches are coming up, I think everybody grew up texting or DMing, or, I think the art of writing a letter is gone away. I think the art of making the phone call and actually having a real conversation, now we have the ability to FaceTime. I think that's gone away in a lot of ways. And that's what I mean by outwork people, that I can still send one more text or write one more letter or make one more phone call, maybe really dig a little bit deeper on who's actually helping this young guy make a decision. And I think when you say good recruiter, I think all of the work and then the ability to develop and create relationships. I think when it's authentic and unique, like, I actually enjoy young people. I enjoy the conversations. I enjoy meeting new people. Yeah. And I think when that's the case and you're willing to outwork people, you can have a ton of success in it. And, I think being, and this is fast forwarding, but being at Tennessee and knowing when I got to Tennessee, man, this is like, you're recruiting against some of the best coaches and the best recruiters in the country, assistants and head coaches. Like, man, I wonder how I've done it is going to work. And I think that experience gave me validation and confidence that, man, like, it is. Yeah. Been able to do it at Toledo, been able to do it at Illinois, been able to do it at Iowa State. And it still holds true even here as the head coach. You can still outwork people. That's right.
Well, helped Toledo to the #1 ranked recruiting class in a MAC in 2010 and 2011. Sometimes that's just phooey, but also it says a lot, though. And when it's all said and done, man, just being able to get the talent in there, because in conjunction, had 2 bowl appearances in 10 and 11 as well. And those definitely work hand in hand. Now, back to kind of on the field stuff, the coaching aspect. So you're in a situation, you got your notebook out, you got your pen out, he told you to recruit one, but you still have to coach that guy that shows up. You still have to coach those tight ends that show up. And at this point in time, you don't have any, you don't have much experience. standing at the front of the room, being the guy that has to have the answers, being the guy that has to be able to teach these guys these techniques, these fundamentals, these skills. What did you do? You know, how did you develop as a good running backs coach? How did you develop as a good tight ends coach?
Yeah, I think it started with leaning on the guys in the room. You know, I talk about Matt Campbell a lot. With Matt, head coach tight ends. Jason Candle, head coach tight ends. I think those guys had a background at the Division III level where they coached everybody.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't have a staff. And so I learned a lot from those guys. And then that first year with the running backs, and then as I got into coaching the tight ends, literally I took every second I could to go learn from somebody. In, you know, spring break, in the summer, I would go visit people. I remember getting in the car and going to the Chicago Bears, then the University of Wisconsin, drove to the University of Minnesota, back, drove down to Arkansas. I remember going to as many OTAs as I could find, anybody that would let us, like went to the Browns, went to the Bengals, went to the Steelers, and I'd sit in running back OTA meetings and watch those guys coach, figure out what they were making important, you know, and it was so interesting to see what was important to different people.
Yeah.
But I learned going into that first year as much as I could, and then in that second year coaching the tight ends as much as I could. And I would sit there and watch film, and I would ask the O-line guy, which happened to be Matt Campbell at the time, you know, on the run game part of it, talked to Jason Candle a lot on the pass game part of it. There were times I think I was proud of my humility in the sense of, man, Jay, like we're teaching this new route and we go with the wideouts. Let me go with the wideouts and routes on air. Let me go with the wideouts in Indy. Matt come over to the O-line when we work whatever, base run game or base hammer footwork. You know, let me come over with you. You teach it, and having the humility to say, man, like I don't really know, but this guy does, so we're going to go with him, and then I'm going to learn it. And I think humility early, and to be honest with you, Mario, I think humility late, like there's still times guys will ask, man, what do you think here? I'm like, man, I don't know. Let me go find out.
Yeah.
And feel comfortable with that, knowing that, man, like I think at times guys, both coaches and players respect more when you say, man, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just don't, but let me find out.
Right.
And then genuinely going and finding the right answer, or at least the right answer for us. So that was it early, man. There was a lot of I don't knows early on.
Yeah, well, you know, look, obviously I like hitting this podcast chronologically, and so I want to come back to the spot. So let's call a time out here. But you sitting in that chair now as a head coach, and you know you've had the tremendous opportunity to sit in a room with a bunch of tremendous head coaches at all these stops. But now for the first time, do you find yourself doing that and saying, I don't know how I want to approach this? Maybe not as verbally where everybody's hearing it, but you're saying that to yourself, like I don't know. Let me call up Hype. Let me see what he's doing. You know, let me call. Are you doing that now currently as a head coach?
Yeah, I think, you know, the last couple of years before I took this job, I saw and I knew it was coming, right? Like I knew that as we got rolling offensively at UCF and then at Tennessee, like I knew I was going to have opportunities, and super proud of the fact that, one, I waited on an opportunity that I felt like was right for me. Mm-hmm. But more importantly than that, I'm super proud of the way I prepared for the opportunity. I tried to have all of that figured out before I took the job, because I knew, especially in year one, and especially taking over a program here where there had been elite amounts of success early on, but the 3 years before I got here, there wasn't. I knew I was going to have answers, and I was going to have them really, really quickly.
Yeah.
In I guess putting it in another way, I knew I was going to have a plan that was relatively concrete. And so I felt like coming in, I had a lot of the answers, or a blueprint that was my own, that I knew I could go execute.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we get in trouble, we can't execute a plan when it ain't ours. Or we can't coach a certain technique when it's not something that you truly believe in, or that's something that you came up with. So I knew in this case, the plan had to be mine. It had to be thought through by me. I had to see potential issues come. are there still situations where it's like, man, I don't know,
Yeah. Right.
there absolutely are. And I think that's why you surround yourself with people, and you hear it all the time, but you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. I don't know if that's necessarily the case as much as you surround yourself with people that are aligned and view things the same as you. And in our profession, I've aligned myself with people that care about young people more than they care about their own ego, care about the development of the entire program more than they care about where the rankings are or what their stats are. And I think just like I'm attracted to those people that are coaches or in recruiting or in operations or in academics or in player development, whatever department it is, it's the same types of people that I'm attracted to as players. And so I think there are times where I don't have the answer, and I'm still just as comfortable saying, man, let me come back to that.
Yeah.
Because I would rather give you the right answer or the answer that I truly believe is right before I would just throw something out there and hope it sticks. And Mark, I think the thing that I learned early here, because there were times early where it was like, man, either I'm not sure what, not so much I don't know what the right answer is, I'm not sure what the right answer is for us at this current time.
Yeah.
I learned early on, and this was sleepless nights, where I lay there and I'm like, man, how do I get to the right answer really quickly in regards to everything? And I made a commitment to myself, and I stuck to it, and I truly believe it was the right thing, where every decision that we make is, we as in the entire program, at the end of the day, I make with the thought in mind of what is the best thing for our players. Like, what is the ultimate best decision for the entirety of our program, but more importantly than that, even our players. And I think when I wound myself back or reeled myself back into that, I feel like it's been easy in the sense of making the right decision. Because anytime anything comes up, well, what's the best thing for our players?
Right.
It's generally one direction and one answer.
Yeah.
And so, unlike X's and O's where, man, we could do this with this play and this with this play and this with this play, pretty simple, man. What's the best thing for our players? And I feel like as I've stuck to that, it's been way, way, way easy.
Yeah, yeah, amen. I mean, worst case scenario, if the answer doesn't work out, you knew you were doing it with the player's best interest in mind.
That's it, the right intention.
Yeah, absolutely. Now taking it back to Toledo, we'll go ahead and talk about the transition, all right? Because this is kind of your first major transition as a full-time coach, leaving Toledo to take the opportunity at Illinois. How did that opportunity come about? And, did you interview for the job? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, that one was really easy, man. Our head coach at Toledo took the Illinois job, called me, said, "You coming?" And and to be honest with you, that one was really hard. And in the sense of getting the job was easy. The leaving Toledo and leaving that group of guys, and Matt Campbell became the head coach, and I love and trust Matt in so many ways. And there were so many of our young coaches that had opportunities to get promoted, and that guys that we were in that room together for 3 years. And I really, really wanted to stay, to be honest with you. But I was 20, whatever it was at the time, 25, 26, really 26 years old, I think. And it was an opportunity to go to the Big Ten and be a position coach. And I knew I couldn't pass it up. And so I went. And so that there wasn't a whole lot of interviewing, a whole lot of anything. It was literally the day after he took the job, I was in Champaign. And outside of the going back and forth, myself and my wife, of not necessarily wanting to leave the people, I knew it was an opportunity I had to take. And there were times I knew it was the right decision. There were times I regretted it, but it challenged me in a lot of ways. It forced me to meet a lot of new people because we had virtually a completely different staff there, and some guys that I'm still really, really close with. But certainly a challenging job in a lot of ways, which was also really good for my growth.
Yeah. Well, you talked about being 25, 26 at that time. By the time you leave there in 15, so you're around 30, you've coached tight ends, you've been the recruiting coordinator, video coordinator, running backs coach, special teams coordinator, you coached on offense, you coached on defense, defensive line, linebacker. high school, you do a little bit of everything. So you're well versed. I mean, about as well versed as you could probably be at that point in time. Especially as you sit in a chair right now, how advantageous has it been to, especially in a full-time role where that's your responsibility all the time? How advantageous was it to have that just wide variety of experience in positions?
Yeah, I think certainly prepared me in every imaginable way, knowing a little bit of everything. I think the special teams part, and I tell our young coaches all the time, man, like, ask to be involved in special teams, ask to sit in those meetings, certainly be involved when it's presented to the team. Like, that was the one opportunity that I truly enjoyed because, one, I was recruiting, obviously, areas and all sides of the ball. It was my one opportunity to be able to coach everybody.
Yeah.
And coach different positions, different skill sets. It was your opportunity to stand in front of the team and how do I get the starting linebacker to play on this punt team? Because he don't want to. He didn't. Right. Not a single person in that room got recruited other than the specialist to play on special teams.
Right.
Never in anybody's home did you ever sit in and say, man, like, I think you'd be a great gunner.
Yeah.
And, it never happened. So you're trying to get guys to do things that they really didn't get recruited to do and really aren't like overly interested in doing. And there's always some that were, but I thought that was the best experience I could ever have, was standing in front of that room. And there was years, between doing some of it at Toledo, doing a lot of it at Illinois, doing some of it again at Iowa State. There was opportunities to stand in front of the team. And I think, so it's always fascinating to me when head coaches become head coaches and had never coordinated the offense, defense, or teams. I think it's so unique because never had to stand in front of the room and justify what the heck you're telling them to do, sell them the scheme, and really quickly too. And I'm not saying that you can't do it. It's just fascinating to me sometimes because those were the most priceless experiences that I had. And, but no, again, I go back to, it gave me the confidence to go really coach any position or do any job, because up until you have the experience, it's really hard to have real confidence.
Yeah.
And so, once you wrapped it all around or wrapped it all together and like, man, like I've kind of done a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
That's where the hardest part was then reeling it back in and saying, man, like, at what point am I going to be ready to be a coordinator? Because I've just done a little bit of everything. I've never really reeled in back into how do I take the next step, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, man. And it's so funny. I reflect back on my career. My last job, I was the running backs coach, special teams coordinator at Davidson. And, I would like to take pride. I found some similarities in your answers in regards to, you love the young people, man. That kept me feeling so young, been around those kids in those locker rooms, man. And I do miss it. It's probably one of the biggest things I miss, those relationships being around those young people. But after I got through been a recruiting coordinator my last year before I took the job at the AFCA, I look back at my career, I was like, man, I wasn't as tight as I was the receivers coach at this place. I didn't know those DB coaches like I do when I'm a special teams coordinator, man. I could have did a lot better job, and not knowing at that point in time I was going to come to the AFCA, like I had big intentions on being a lot better at that, because it is different. It is different when you're the special teams coordinator and you look in the meeting room and you got all the position coaches sitting alongside of the wall listening to you coach. You got the whole damn team in there, minus a quarterback or maybe a couple offensive linemen in there listening to you coach, and you just develop these bonds that you don't get. I don't think anywhere else. So it is interesting, man, that special teams coordinator role in correlation to the head coach prep, because that's about the next time or the only time, even as an OC or DC, that you just get to get the whole team's ears. So I love that you pointed that out, man. Now, so let me ask you this question here, especially kind of we're in this point where we're starting to get close to where you are now. 2012 to 15, you've been at Illinois in the Big Ten. You had multiple positions, held multiple roles there. 09 to 11, you're with some phenomenal coaches. First time having your own rooms. Get experience of running backs, tight ends, recruiting coordinator. You get some awesome GA opportunities. Man, this is a tough question here, so hopefully you got an answer for me. But you look back early on in your career, man. I know I have my place that I'm like, man, that was my spot, man. That's where I really grew as a coach. My wife got married, man. This stop was special? All of them were special, but this is just the one. Did you have any of those ones that you look back on and you're like, yeah, that Toledo stop right there. That's when Coach Golesh came alive. Do you have any of those stops like that?
I think the time at Iowa State, I think they all have a little bit of I can look back and say, man, I grew tremendously there as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a coach. I think the Iowa State years were really fascinating to me because we got there. It was kind of like the gang was back together.
Oh, yeah.
Because Matt left Toledo, took that job. I went with him. I was fortunate enough to go with, but it was all of us were young guys together at Toledo. Then we were not so young anymore. And it was this unique challenge of taking over a program that had been bad for so long. One of the few programs that has never won a conference championship left. And working for a guy that truly believed that we were going to win a national championship there. And you sit there and you're like, man, like we're in Ames, Iowa. It is 2 degrees. This guy is so crazy because he actually thinks we're going to win here. And following him and his plan and all of our plan, he was really good about listening to all of us. But it was the first time I felt comfortable giving my 2 cents on a lot of different things, all from recruiting to special teams to offense I felt comfortable. I felt like myself. I felt like I was with a bunch of people I trusted and trusted me. So I think that place was unique. The place that really, I think, profoundly for me stands out is, and not so much because it was recent, but the first year at Tennessee, we took over a really crazy situation. We got there at the end of January, right towards the tail end of the COVID restrictions, but we got the job so late. Again, a program that traditionally as historic as there is in the country, but had been complete garbage for about 10 years on and off.
Yeah.
And what the expectations were and what the standard was, what the funding was like, and walking into that situation super late, getting NCAA restrictions dropped on us, and playing a season with 60-some scholarship players and watching hype lead through a different lens. It's so different than UCF, and watching him lead, watching him delegate more than he ever had before. And then honestly, having the confidence to go run an offense in a room of coaches and a room of players that were different than anywhere I'd ever been, in terms of managing the egos, and then throw in the transfer portal and throw in the NIL component to all of it, and figuring out, again, I think what we talked about earlier, Mario, is like, there's so much going on. The pressure's as real as can be. Man, how do we stay in this straight, narrow path and make it about the players? Make everything about the players. And I thought Josh did an incredible job of that. But I think for me personally, the growth there to one, work as hard as I could to get our side of the ball right, but 2, have success and let the work really show on a national stage. That was, I would think for me, or I would say for me, gave me the confidence I needed, and say, man, like I am now ready. Because up until that point, I don't know that I was ready to be a head coach. I never thought about it, never worried about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I kind of got this lineage thing, but I mean, I kind of like where this dialogue is going with a lot of these spots. So I'll go ahead and ask this question here. You mentioned walking into Iowa State and your head ball coach having these lofty expectations at a place that, I mean, I play in the Big 12. It traditionally has just never been very good. Definitely their fair share of wins and upsets and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately just a program that hadn't seen that success, versus walking in a program like Tennessee, where the expectations are unbelievable, especially in the situation you guys were walking into. What are some of the comparisons when you're in a Big 12 program, and I know that we can look at football this way, but that fan base in Ames, we got to be winning the conference championships. I'm imagining they love to see you guys in CF, would love to see you guys in the college football playoffs, all that kind of stuff. What's kind of some of the differences or some of the similarities when you're walking into these Power 5 programs and you do have these expectations that don't match what's going on behind the walls of the facilities?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to leadership and the leadership being realistic. And, I think both places, the similarities for me is both coaches were in it for the long haul. Both head coaches were in it for the long haul. Both head coaches were there to build programs. I think there's such a difference between building a team and building a program, and you see it now in current day college football. You can do it both ways, and both ways for some have worked, but the intention of building a program, meaning laying a foundation and having values and having standards of how you want to do it. That doesn't mean that it's all high school recruiting. That doesn't mean that it's all transfer portal, but actually having a plan for how you want to build long-term sustained success. And both of those places, Matt's done it at Iowa State. This is going into year 10. Mm-hmm. And Josh has done it going into year 4 now of building a foundation to have success long term. And so essentially building a program rather than building a team. But I think both at those points in my life were uniquely cool challenges. I think both I learned a ton from, but I think as long as you are where your feet are, Mario, I don't know that either of those situations are drastically different, because the standard and expectations from the outside can't ever creep into your building.
Yeah.
Your standards and expectations gotta be real at all times, which is we're going to outwork everybody. We're going to work as hard as we can. We're going to do this for the right reasons. And at the end of it, the result will show what the result is. And we talk a lot about process here in terms of being process driven rather than result oriented. And I thought Matt did an incredible job of that. I think Josh has done an incredible job at Tennessee. Just worry about the process, man. As soon as you start worrying about the results and what people think, man, you're gonna go the wrong way down a path.
Yeah. You're gonna get yourself in some trouble there. Now, interestingly enough, I would have expected for you to I would have expected for you to mention that 2020 year, the first year coordinating. You left Iowa State. You kind of were with a group of guys, whether it was at Illinois, Toledo, that you had been with since 2009. So curious, number one, of how you got connected to Heupel, and then you look at the offense in 2019 at Iowa State versus the offense that showed up on the field at UCF. Obviously, major differences, and I know they were kind of doing some stuff prior to you getting there. Well, how did you get connected to Heupel, and then what was it like, kind of getting immersed into that new wave of offense that we're seeing a lot more here these days?
Yeah, I go back to that Baylor time. I was really, really intrigued by that offense. I think Matt Campbell was really intrigued at Iowa State. We studied a lot of what Baylor did, and just as much as the offensive scheme, really the growth of that program. Because again, I coached against it in 2008. Mm-hmm. Well, 2016, our first year at Iowa State was the last year of that staff at Baylor. So you got to see both ends of it.
That's right.
In terms of what that offense is. And when you talk about trying to be different than everybody else, that was different. And so we were always intrigued. We took thoughts and ideas from that system. And you get to UCF and Josh and Jeff Lebby and then myself with a different spin on it. Like, we've all kind of morphed in this into what's best for us. And so Glenn Ellerby, who's the offensive line coach at UCF, we GA'd together at Oklahoma State. He's a good friend. I got to know Levy over the years, recruiting DFW in East Texas and running into Lev and becoming really good friends. Really that group of guys. And shoot, Hype and I used to run into each other in Texas all the time recruiting. Mm-hmm. And so I was really familiar with those guys. I think Glenn Ellerby really probably more than anybody helped me as the O-line coach. Man, like, let's sit down and talk to this guy. And that's how I ended up there. And in the COVID time, I would say helped me drastically, because we had 4 months where you were meeting with players and recruiting, but got to do ball with Hype a lot. and like a lot.
Yeah.
There was no on the road recruiting. There was no spring ball. We substituted all of that time with just doing football and honestly learning from each other a lot. Myself growing so much within that system, and then being able to put my own touch on it, and then really 9 months later going to Tennessee and then having to reinvent ourselves in terms of the change that had to be made because of the talent level and the schemes you were going to see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that it's funny, man. And I promise you'll think I'm making this up by doing homework. So I've known Hype for a long time. I've known Hype since about 2012, and so when he was at Missouri, before I guess he got the UCF job as an offensive coordinator, I watched those games. I watched him offensively in 4 and 5. I mean, just throwing the ball around. Obviously, it wasn't that Baylor spin. Obviously, I'm a Baylor alum. But in 2011, where I was at ULM at the time, Baylor actually came and played us, and they weren't in the extremely wide splits. They weren't as fast. And then when we came to Waco to play, and we somehow we managed to get ourselves in a home and away. We walked out with no money against a really good team, unfortunately. But anyways, man, those guys could have scored 100 points on us, and I no joke, man. And that's when that was kind of the first year that you saw you could literally look on the field and kind of see the splits a little bit wider. You could see the alignment splits a little bit tighter, all that kind of stuff, man. And in our bye week, we actually we pulled up all the Baylor film and we installed that. So we were doing extended split stuff in 2012 at ULM, or excuse me, in 2013 at ULM. And man, it was kind of a part of our offense. Now, we weren't doing it at a high level. We didn't have quite the talent. And I think we probably made a mistake because we're still doing a lot of what we did with what they did, and we tried to make it make sense. And so I've always had this infatuation kind of with this time period within you guys of everything that went on. And one of the most unique thing was after I got out, I would go and get asked, just to help out and do a clinic and here or there, and I would always do it in extended splits, screen game, pass game. I got the presentation still on my computer, and I would always at the end of it be like, you can't do that in the SEC. You can't do that against a good defense. You can't do that versus – so – you get to take this offense to the SEC, and I've heard it firsthand. How did you be able to? How were you able to get that done against where a lot of people said you couldn't quite run that type of offense? How were you able to be successful there?
I think we did a really good job of adjusting too. I think the core foundation never changed, but we also had SEC players on offense.
Right.
So you had SEC O-linemen, you had SEC wideouts, you had SEC backs, you had SEC quarterbacks, and so we also had SEC players. So I think the ability when we got there, and Hype coming from Missouri to UCF and being in that league for 2 years, a lot of conversations of, man, you're going to see a lot more man. A lot more people are going to trust that they can just play what they play against you.
Yeah.
We're going to have to evolve. And I think even from year 1 to year 2 at Tennessee, we evolved greatly. So much more formation variation, so much different things in the run game, a lot of different things in the pass game, like where I think we stayed ahead of the curve there, and we were still able to present different pictures to defenses. The foundation never changed in terms of we were going to play faster than everybody in the country, and we were going to push like crazy with formation variation and changing split pictures. But even from year 1 to year 2, how much we evolved, I think, changed in the screen game, like just different things that we were able to do. At the end of the day, what never changed is we were able to get our best players on your worst players really, really fast.
Yeah.
And whether that be run game or pass game, that's where I think we adjusted really well, which was what gave us the ability to be successful.
Yeah. Well, this broke my brain when I always do some kind of stats to brag on. But you guys, after a 1-11 season program that you inherited, you guys finished 7-6 with a 45-0 Boca Raton Bowl win, largest shutout in that bowl game history. The offensive numbers, 451 yards per game, and then this is the one that hurt my brain here, was 82.1 plays per game, led the country. And, that was always one of the interesting things is, how fast that offense can move, how many plays that offense can get in. And unfortunately, if you struggle a little bit, how fast how much you can leave your defense hanging out to dry a little bit. How you don't have to get into specifics because I know you're here now, and once again, I don't want to get too much into the ball stuff. But how has that offense morphed as you continue to change places and change athletes and change quarterbacks and change this stuff? So I'm sure it's still kind of the same thing. I didn't get to watch too much of USF ball this year, unfortunately. I apologize about that. But how were you able to make it your own there at South Florida?
Yeah, I think the thing going from UCF to going to Tennessee to coming here, I think the one thing that hasn't changed is that the foundation of it has stayed the same. The tempo and using the entire width of the field.
Yeah.
And the entire length of the field. What has changed is who the quarterback is, who the skill players are, what you're capable of doing with the O-line. And so being able to adjust, just like any offense, how do you get your playmakers the ball in space?
Yeah.
And we've just found a way to do it faster than everybody else.
Yeah.
And that part hasn't changed. But what's changed is the players and then what pictures you're getting defensively. So I think every year we've adjusted it to get the ball in our playmakers' hands. The challenge has been continue to grow in that regard while still being able to play really, really fast. And at the end of it, you kind of see guys that have gone their own separate ways. We've all kind of grown in our own unique ways, but the foundation of it has stayed the same. And to be honest with you, we watch each other's stuff. I'm sure we do. Mm-hmm. And we've also kept the circle really, really tight for a reason.
Yeah.
So that there's not just a whole lot out there. But I think on the surface, there's been a lot more formation variation. There's been a lot more different run and pass concepts because conceptually you got to do what works for your guys. If you don't have guys that can run vertically, it'd be silly to run them vertically.
Yeah.
You got guys that are big and strong in the middle of the field. It'd be silly not to put them in the middle of the field and let them be big and strong. And so we've always been balanced. That is one thing that stayed consistent in terms of run pass. And I think giving the illusion of run and throwing it vertically and then having the illusion of it's going to be pass and being able to run it and having an athletic quarterback certainly helps. But I think the core foundation has never changed. The guys that have had success in it have been able to evolve with different personnel.
Yeah, man. I can nerd out with you on this stuff all day long, to be brutally honest with you, man. And I know we got to get close to a close here, but so my last semi-football question, or I guess maybe even statement. I think, when I was in high school, I had Lee Hayes came over and was our offensive coordinator. He spent a little time at Texas Tech, so I played in that air raid, and I was a football junkie. I knew I wanted to get into coaching, all that kind of stuff. And the coolest thing was watching how, as many people came out of that air raid tree, how you on any given Saturday you could watch 4 different air raid teams, and they all just look. They're all running mesh. They're all running shallow cross. They're all running 4 verts. But man, it looks so different. The run game was always different. Screen game was always different. And the unique thing, obviously, at Baylor was during that 8-year stint or whatever when they were all together. They weren't telling anybody anything. The secret wasn't getting out. They were drawing it on napkins and whiteboards and erasing it immediately. I knew the function of what was going on behind there, but I didn't know what was going on. And so all you could do was watch the film and maybe make your own iteration. But you watch Dino Babers leave off the staff there early on, and Syracuse is running it, but it doesn't look quite the same. And then all of a sudden it's UCF, now it's at Arkansas, it's at TCU, and it all looks so totally different. Tennessee is all totally different. Is that unique to you? Is like knowing which guys are doing what you're watching, knowing what they're getting done, but it looks so drastically different to the normal eye?
Yeah, because I think your background in it is so different. Like Hype is so unique because Hype played for Mike Leach at Oklahoma in the true air raid back as you knew it, and then his experiences with Kevin Wilson and Matt Wells, and like he's grown into his iteration of what he played in an air raid. This is not air raid, but having these air raid concepts in the back of his mind, like there's a little bit of everything that he's done, so nothing is new to him. For me playing our coaching at Iowa State, what we were able to get from a skill set standpoint, like we had my last 3 years, we had 3 NFL tight ends.
Right.
and then we had Alan Lazard, Akeem Butler. Like, we had some receivers that could go get it. Like, we played so much in 12. We also had a David Montgomery and a Breece Hall in there at the same time. Like, we played in so much 12, sometimes 13. We were so formation variated. And then you get to UCF and we're not. But Hype is humble enough to say, man, like, we need to be more formation varied. So we played in some more 12. We get to Tennessee and we played in some 10, some 11, some 12, which nobody had ever seen anybody do with this tempo, and as we get here and we're building a roster, I'm like, man, I want to be able to play in 10, 11, 12, and I want to be able to do it all out of the same personnel. Like, that's different, so we're all kind of chasing this ability to be different. But I think at the end of the day, whoever's calling the plays, you got to be comfortable with what you're calling.
Yeah.
And as long as you're calling plays that fit your personnel, you can have a ton of success in your own right.
Oh, I appreciate you diving into that, Coach. Well, I know I got to get you going here, so I'm going to ask you two questions. One about 35 and 35. And this question here is about being a first-year head coach. You get a staff together. What was your approach in putting together a staff that's going to help you be successful?
Yeah, I think the best thing I did was a year ago, really 2 years ago now, but that summer going into my last year at Tennessee, I took a week, we went on vacation and honestly thought through all of that, thought through my plan going in, but thought through the staff as well. And so I was prepared. There wasn't any one hire where I was like, man, what should we do here?
Right.
Basically every single person I was going to hire, I had prepped from the summer before, and I had a depth chart like I would in recruiting.
Wow.
And I went to 1, then I went to 2, then I went to 3.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that I had a lot of guys that followed me from Tennessee. I had a couple of guys that followed me from Iowa State that I'm humbled that they chose to come down here and work with us. This isn't a hard place to sell in terms of coming and working in Tampa, Florida, but and it's an incredible place and the ability to build. But that was my approach, was that I had a plan going in.
Yeah.
And it made it really easy, made the transition easy, and it also made the communication part of it easy and being able to build a roster really quickly. So that made it simple. I say easier of the option of not having a plan going in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Coach, always hard to find an hour of a head ball coach's time, man. So I do appreciate you. But the last big thing I wanted to hit on, man, is, probably my baby here at the AFCA is the 35 under 35. And, just being able to find guys that are doing well in a profession and try to have a little foresight in the success that's to come. And you're the epitome of that for me with this 35 under 35 program. You and a couple guys out of that class. What was that experience like? Why would you encourage guys to be a part of that?
Man, it was awesome. And I was there like a week after I took the UCF OC job. So but I was so pumped to get there and learn and grow. We were talking about it off the air, but the people I met in that class, you talked about Braun and Kenny Dillingham was there, and there was just some awesome young coaches that I met that are still really good friends to this day, and I think will continue to be friends, and honestly beyond friends, like allies in the profession of like, man, how are you handling this?
Right.
I think some really good lessons there, because it was all a bunch of really, really good human beings that came, because I think even the guys that came and spoke, they were truly in it for the profession, and I think our profession is going through a crazy, crazy time right now. It gave me the opportunity to meet a bunch of guys and then go back in the 4 years after and have the ability to speak on my experiences really genuinely. I think it's like a safe space. You go in there, you're like, all right, these other dudes are just like me.
Yeah, for sure.
And I can shut this door and talk in full transparency and genuinely try to grow our profession. Because I think the more great human beings we have in our profession, the better this is going to go. And that 35 under 35 experience was really, really cool for me to learn, grow, but then honestly being a little bit of a fraternity of dudes that have gone through it that I can look back on and use as resources.
Coach, well, hey, I appreciate the time, man. I'm always going to be cheering you on per usual, man, and look forward to catching up with you here soon, okay?
Thank you so much, Mario. I appreciate you having me on, man.
All right, brother. Have a good one.
CoachComm has been delivering tough headsets for tough teams for more than 31 years. It's why 97% of FBS teams and thousands of high schools across the country rely on CoachComm. Get the best for your team. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. If you'd like to learn more about this week's episode, head over to AFCA.com. There, you can access every episode and find corresponding show notes. Remember, you can catch every episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm on wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. While you're there, we'd love for you to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your feedback helps us improve and grow. Keep up with the latest news by following us on social media. Connect with us at Inside the Headset, and remember to tag us when you share your favorite episodes. For more updates on all things AFCA, be sure to follow the @WeAreAFCA social media accounts. If you're not a part of the AFCA community yet, visit AFCA.com to join thousands of NFL, college, and high school coaches nationwide and across the globe. Elevate your coaching game with an AFCA membership. You'll gain exclusive access to the annual AFCA convention, magazine, digital library, and AFCA Insider email. Stay up to date with the latest stories and news on the AFCA website. More than just a convention, the AFCA offers continuous education, guidance, networking, and more. Celebrate the past and shape the future with the AFCA. It's about fostering exceptional coaches who create outstanding teams and even better individuals. Invest in your skills and make a lasting impact today by engaging with the AFCA. Your journey starts here.